So I think we'll probably just get started. We've only got until 3 o'clock. I think most people that signed up are probably here. I'm sure we'll get a handful more dropping in. So listen, welcome everyone. Thanks so much for taking the time to come along to hear us talk about our third DAD survey. We did our first one as lockdown began, all those many months ago, it seems, a year and a half ago. So if we could just a couple of things. Kathy mentioned to those of you that dropped in earlier, if you could put the name of your organisation next to your own name, that would be great. That would be really helpful. We won't be able to do introductions or anything like that because there's too many people. So please feel free to say hello in the chat box, who you are, what your organisation is, and so on. This is a great chance to network as well for everyone. As we go through the session, so Kathy's put up the outline of what we're going to be talking about today. Kathy is going to talk to you very shortly about the preliminary, easy for me to say, preliminary findings from our DAD survey, our third one, as I said. And then we're going to have Jessica Moran going to talk about the findings from in relation to the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation. We'll then have a chance to reflect on everything that you've heard. As you're listening to Kathy and Jessica, if you have any thoughts, any observations or any questions, please put these in the chat box. And then when it comes to the part where we reflect on the session, I'll try to make sure that any questions that have been asked can be asked, and we'll do our best to answer them. And then finally, we'll finish off by talking about what's next for Fathers Network Scotland and how hopefully you can be a part of that. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Kathy Sexton.
Well, hi everybody, lovely to see you all. Thanks very much for coming to hear about our latest survey. Hopefully we won't disappoint you and it'll be time well spent. I know lots of people have got Zoom fatigue, me included, but hopefully you'll learn a lot today. And I thought I'd start off by setting the context. This was a piece written by the Fatherhood Institute in a study that they published earlier on this year in May, and it just sets the context for what we're talking about. Actually, you know, we've all lived through COVID, but actually it's created a seismic shift in our society. And particularly when it comes to dads and mums and family life. Dads have come back into the house and taken up quite a lot of the hands-on caring of children. I suppose what this survey, we've done a series of 3 surveys over the last 18 months. We did our first during lockdown 1, which closely mirrored what the Fatherhood Institute did on their vastly bigger piece of research with 2,000 dads. We had about 300, but we found that dads were stepping up and taking a much more hands-on caring of their children in the home. The second survey that we undertook was during lockdown 2. We found that dads were really struggling to balance their work and family life, and also that their mental health was deteriorating. However, dads continued to take on that caring role within the house. And not only that, I think that it changed fundamentally how dads wanted to behave in the future. So more and more of them wanted to stay at home. They wanted to be there for their children. So this most recent survey, really we wanted to find out whether those trends were continuing. So what was life like for dads at home and work now that COVID restrictions have eased and there was a sense of normality coming back into people's lives? How is their mental health? What were their familial relationships, their relationships with their co-parents and their children like? And again, what were their plans for the future? Had that changed in the last, the last 6 months? So first of all, I'll just quickly talk about the dads that took part. So we had quite a small cohort, it's 175 dads, but they're quite representative. So we had dads from right across Scotland. I'm quite pleased to say that we had dads from 29 out of the 32 local authority areas. We had dads aged between 25 and 64. Sadly, we didn't get any dads aged under 25, and hopefully we'll rectify that in future surveys. But what's interestingly, and I suspect there's a bit of dumb luck with this, is that our cohort was really evenly distributed across different socioeconomic backgrounds. So we had a really even spread, as you can see in the chart. So as you'd expect, most of the dads had either 1 or 2 children, so well over 3/4 had 1 or 2. 13% had 3, and those that were slight gluttons for punishment had over 8% had over 4 or over. Again, we had quite an even distribution of the youngest child's age, with a peak during the early years, so that primary school age. This is kind of quite interesting and probably fairly pertinent. So dads' living arrangements, we asked about how dads were living with their children. So 3/4 of them lived with their children and the other parent. 18% lived apart from their children's other parent, but that could be shared parenting. There's a whole kind of smorgasbord of what that could be. 9% lived alone with their children, and 7% said that there are other circumstances. But we drilled down into that a little bit more, and we found out that 10% of all those dads had little or no contact with their children. So again, a little bit more context, and I hope you like this image that I chose for you. I thought it was terribly representative of everything that we've gone through in the last 18 months, not. But, but dads, as I said, the role of dads has changed dramatically over the last 18 months. And again, I'm referring to the Fatherhood Institute report from earlier on this year. But as you can see, the information from the Institute of Fiscal Studies, which came out in line with the first lockdown, shows this huge increase in the number of hours that dads were spending at home and involved in childcare. So sadly, we do ask about dads doing chores at home, but sadly we don't have information that we could show over time, sadly. But just to give you an idea of how things are changing in the house, we asked that about how many times they cook for their children. And as you can see, dads like to spend time cooking for their kids. 39% said that they were cooking at least once a day, and 41 in addition were cooking a few times a week. And this seems to be fairly similar across all of our surveys. So you'll see that there isn't actually a huge amount of difference using the chart on the right-hand side. There's been a 5% dip in the number of times that dads are cooking at least once a day from its height during the second lockdown. But you can see that they're holding up pretty well, considering many dads have gone back to work and kids are back at school. So that gives you a good indication of what's going on. The number of hours that dads are playing or supporting their children. Again, if you look at the right-hand side data, you'll see that there is a drop-off in the number of dads doing more than 25 hours a week. I guess you'd expect that again, you know, as nurseries and schools have gone back, are back and open, you would naturally see, you would imagine that you would see that drop off. But actually, I feel very optimistic about this, actually. I think that these figures are really holding up pretty well over time. What's the other interesting thing is I split out the dads who were spending more than 10 hours or more per week with their children playing or supporting their learning. And it looks like we get these two spikes, one during the early years, one during the first year of the child's life, and then another kind of surge during children aged between 6 and 8. But I suppose slightly concerningly to me is that there's this dip during the early years. And that's of concern because we know that dads with or young children with very involved dads do better at schools and nurseries. They make friends more easily. They're better able to understand how other people feel. They have fewer behavioral problems, and they're more likely to get good school results. So I think there's a little bit of work to do around why that there's such a marked drop, and whether there's anything that we can do to increase those numbers, to increase the amount of time that dads are spending during that period. We also asked what dads most loved being with their children. And you can see on the chart on the right-hand side, being outdoors came up top. So if you want to involve dads in your activities, being outdoors is probably quite a good way of doing it. 27% just said that they loved being around their kids. And one dad said, just being around them, they're bloody brilliant. I thought that kind of summed it up rather nicely. 22% talked about loving playing with their kids or taking part in sports. And that might be rugby or football or whatever it is, but it could just be kitchen discos with your youngest child, or building dens and playing with Lego. So 13% also loved helping their children learn. So if there's anybody in education out there, dads are really interested in helping their children at school. So you can build on that. And 3% loved everything. As one dad said, she's been a shining light during these difficult times. Watching her curiosity grow and watching as she learns new things has given me so much joy. So we asked about dad's work-life balance. And again, as you'd expect, this has probably become easier since the restrictions around COVID have eased. So we're now seeing 40% who are finding it challenging or very challenging, compared to a height, I think, of around 52% in the last two lockdowns. I'm not too sure. I don't have the figures in front of me, but you can see there's a drop off there. So for the dads that are struggling, it looks like it's the issues around are around competing demands. So one dad says more time working equals no time with family, more time with family equals money issues and struggling financially. And there's guilt associated with making those choices. So I feel guilty if I spend time at work or away from my children. I feel guilty if I spend time with my children when I could be earning money. I feel guilty if I do anything for myself. We asked all the dads who are working if they had grandparents or relatives that could help take care of their children, and 46% of them did, which is great. But for many of the dads who don't have that support network around about them, they're exposed and vulnerable, I suppose. And one dad says, we're on our own, all the relatives and parents live far away, no local support networks or friends. So most interestingly, I think that I saw this divide in families who had access to family-friendly working and those that didn't. So you can see that these are the number of dads, when asked, can you tell us a bit about your experience of balancing work and family life, told us roughly about these different elements of their life. So 7% talk positively about having family-friendly employers and positively about home working. And on the other hand, many dads talk negatively about the impact of unfamily-friendly working. So for example, long hours or shift work or difficult employers. So what does the negative impact of long hours, shift work and lack of family-friendly working look like? So this is what some of the dads told us. I work long and unusual shifts, so it's challenging. I also travel from work for multiple days at a time. I often think that the balance isn't right. However, without traveling and working long shifts, I wouldn't be able to afford a lot of my family's needs. And on the other side, 7% with understanding flexible employers said that it's made a huge difference. I used to travel for work a lot, before the pandemic and the office space. I've been working from home and traveling much less in the last 18 months, which has allowed me to take the kids to school almost every day, which has been amazing. So it makes a huge difference to dads' lives. So we'll now come on to dad's mental health, which is another section of our survey. And you can see, I think, in this graph, quite how significant the change has been since the first lockdown to now. So you'll see on the right-hand side, the dads who have bad or very bad mental health at the moment. So this has gone from, I don't have figures, trying to do some mental arithmetic. So just over 20% to almost 40% now, which is a really, really significant shift. And also optimism about the next 12 months has gone down. So during lockdown, the second lockdown, people who are feeling worried or very worried about the next 12 months was quite low in comparison to how dads are feeling at the moment. So I think that not only is dad's mental health deteriorating, but their optimism about the future is deteriorating as well. So we're going to have a look at what's happening with dad's mental health, the deterioration around dad's mental health. So overall, of all the dads that we had answering our survey, 69% of them told us that their mental health had deteriorated over the last 6 months. And we asked them why. So the chart on the right-hand side gives you a kind of overview of the sorts of issues that were coming up when we asked that question. So almost 30% cited work or unemployment, child custody and shared parenting. About a quarter of the dads who answered that question told us about those issues. Again, competing demands on dad's time and resources, sense of isolation and loneliness, finances, personal health, could be mental health or just physical health. Issues surrounding COVID is another one. And then grief, hopelessness, despair, health of a family member, exhaustion, no time off, public services, and fear and uncertainty about the future also came out. So there's a huge array of issues that dads were coming up against. So we'll look at the deterioration in terms of work and unemployment. So we can see from the first quotes that a dad, the pressure of work and family took its toll, and a dad had to take time off work in order to deal with his mental health issues. And unfortunately, he's back now. But another dad says stress at work, there's no one to talk to about them. As I said before, a significant proportion of dads was shared who were dealing with custody issues or shared parenting issues, so where they didn't live with their partner anymore, were having problems with their mental health. And I think that this quote sums it up rather elegantly. The longer it goes without seeing my kids, the harder it gets. So dads really suffer when they're apart from their children, and dads with little or no contact with their children seem to suffer inordinately more so. Something to bear in mind. Now, as I said, there's been this huge spread of issues around why dad's mental health seems to be deteriorating. But one thing that struck me when I was reading through the details of this is that dads seem to be managing multiple issues at the same time, seem to be suffering the most. So you can see that this is a chart on the right-hand side showing the number of issues that dads talked about when they told us about their deterioration of their mental health. So 35% told us about one issue, 22% told us about two issues, but actually more than 40% had 3 or 4 issues or more that are competing in their life. So it's that kind of stacking of issues seemed to be creating a lot of pressure on dads, and it was coming out, I think, as poor mental health. So these two quotes sum it up reasonably well. Workload is a big factor as I don't have time for myself. Also lost my mum to cancer in April and just had a baby girl 7 weeks earlier after a difficult pregnancy. Being a shielder and having a 4-year-old child whose mum passed away at the start of COVID, life has become so difficult. I feel ignored and forgotten about in life. We just lost money through benefits and reduction in PIP. I don't know how they're expecting us to live anymore. It's so hard just getting through the day. And with Christmas coming up, I wish the world would swallow me up. So fortunately, dads are seeking support. The number of dads looking for support, so the number of dads who said that their mental health was deteriorating but are looking somewhere for support, is holding up. I think there's been about a 3% drop from our last survey to this survey. So actually dads are seeking support. I think what's kind of interesting, particularly about this survey, is the significant drop in the number of dads who are sharing how they feel with their partner. So that's gone from 67% down to 55% within a year. And it looks like somehow that's been compensated through online activities. So the number of dads looking for or receiving support online through a helpline has increased from 9% up to 20%, so almost double from our last survey. So there's something happening there, and hopefully these next slides will shed some more light on that. So this next section of the survey, we talked about familial relationships, and the first part of that we talked about parents and co-parents. So as you can see through this graph, the number of dads who think that their relationship has been positively affected in the last 6 months has steadily declined. And the number of dads who think that their relationship has been negatively affected over the last 6 months has steadily increased, which is quite a bad sign, I would say. So when we're talking about negativity, 50 of the dads talked again about separation, child custody, and shared parenting. One dad who has obviously split up reasonably recently says, I haven't spoken much since you walked out, but I've not had any communication in the last 3.5 months despite trying to organise some mediation. So for those who weren't dealing with those issues, 23 dads living with their partners talked about a range of issues, including partners' health and their mental health, lack of intimacy, issues with home working and working away from home, and issues around poor communication. But once again, it seems like there's this layering of pressure on families that's leading to exhaustion and stress. So as one dad said, we're both exhausted by life and constant pressures, less money, less time, more stress, there's more arguments than ever. No time for ourselves to fix issues and plan for the future or relax. On the flip side, let's talk about the dads who have had positive relationships with their partners or co-parents. 17 dads talked about spending time together, good communication and mutual support being key. One dad said, we support each other well. There are strains, but talking about these helped. So we'll now move on to children. Actually, in some respects, you can see there's a kind of honeymoon effect. So during the first lockdown, the number of dads who saw an improvement in their relationship with their children during the first lockdown was up at 60%, so really, really high. That dropped down slightly during second lockdown when I think everybody was getting a bit more fraught. And it's down to 37% in this most recent survey. But as you can see, those that are talking about it being the same as before, so that sort of stabilization in the middle seems to be increasing. And actually, dads talking about their relationship being affected negatively is coming down from the last lockdown, which is really good news. So the positives, 39 dads, or 2/3 of them, talked about spending time with their kids. So we've spent quality time together, which has strengthened our bond. And for many of those, as I said before, it's been as a result of family-friendly working. I work compressed hours, which allows 2 afternoons each week just with the kids. I go to Bali with them and give them one-to-one time each. And we'll come on to the last little bit, and I'll stop talking in a second and hand over to Jessica. But this is probably, in a way, the most interesting element. So how are dads changing how they're going to, or how do dads want to change how they parent in the future? So we asked all of our dads if they want to change in the future, and 58% of all the dads, 175 that we asked, said that yes, they want to change how they parent in the future. 41% of us, 41% told us that they wanted to be there for their children, be there more for their children. So whether that's more time or more quality time, just being there seems to be hugely important. I want to be there for my son a lot during the week, as I've been working from home, and seeing him in the morning and evening has been great. And again, 11% said that they wanted to ensure that family-friendly working was part of their future. I want time with my kids, short working days and hours, more time with them. I work from home and aim to be more flexible, so I fit work around my family commitments rather than vice versa. So that's it for me. I'm going to have a sip of tea and hand over to Jessica Moran. So we're really lucky to have Jessica on board with us. Jessica is a researcher currently at the University of Glasgow, and she's also a member of our board. And she took a look at our data set in relation to the SIMD. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Jessica for her to talk through her slides.
Thanks, Kathy. That's fantastic. Can I go back one, please?
Oops. There we go.
Thank you. It's so good to hear the outcome of the survey, and there's so much data there to dig into. I don't have a huge amount to say about this. I thought I'd leave it mostly to you, but I just wanted to kind of introduce the index of multiple deprivation for anybody who's not familiar with it. So the Scottish index of multiple deprivation is a relative measure of deprivation across Scotland. If an area is identified as deprived, and this can mean that people have a lower income, but it can also mean fewer resources and opportunities. So the way it's calculated is across 7 domains, which are income, employment, education, health, access to services, crime, and housing. And so the purpose of having this index of multiple deprivation is to identify areas of high deprivation to focus services that can support people. And this is the first of the Fathers Network surveys that's featured the index of multiple deprivation, and the way we collect that data is through asking people for their postcodes, and then we can identify which area they live in. And I think I would say, as a researcher who's done quite a lot of work in fatherhood studies over the years, that it's quite challenging to access dads who are living in more deprived circumstances, especially in this, to get a larger data set. So it's fantastic that we've seen this spread across the areas of deprivation. And the one thing I kind of wanted to highlight from this was the impact on mental health. So could I just go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So just looking at just this single factor of the relationship between multiple deprivation and mental health. So the SIMD data here is divided into 5 quintiles, so 20% at each quintile of the population. And you'll see that there's a really big difference between the most deprived and the least deprived areas. And we really have dads in the most deprived areas, almost 90% of dads saying that their mental health or well-being has deteriorated. And obviously this is still at kind of 64% for dads at the least deprived, but it's obviously something that we really need to pay attention to. And I just wanted to highlight, it's absolutely fantastic that Fathers Network Scotland have got this data, because as a researcher in this area, I know how hard it is to get to find out what dads' experience is, especially dads from more deprived backgrounds. So I think kind of, we've discussed, Kathy and Chris, next steps would be to kind of try and dig into that further and to try and actually speak to people about their experiences. There are other elements that we can kind of combine, and I know that from the survey data, we saw that optimism about the future was also far lower for dads who are living in areas of deprivation But I believe there were some positive aspects as well, and perhaps we can bring those out later. I haven't got a slide on that, but I think that dads were spending more time with their kids who are from deprived areas. And I think that is something that is quite an interesting area of work, in terms of sometimes dads can be, I think the phrase is time rich and money poor, and they might have more time to spend with their kids, which has a really beneficial effect, but they are in that lower socioeconomic group. So I'm happy to kind of answer any questions that anybody has about the relationship between these things. I do a lot of work. My PhD research is to do with dads in prison, so I kind of have an interest in that. But if not, that was my main point, and I will hand over to Chris.
Chris, you need to unmute.
That's a very good point. Thanks very much, Kathy. Yeah, still not getting it right after all this time on Zoom. So yeah, thanks very much, Jessica and Kathy, for your presentations. An awful lot of information there. This is just a window, an insight into the thoughts and experiences of some dads from across Scotland, and Kathy's kind of outlined, and as has Jessica, what their kind of where they're from, what their backgrounds are, and so on, and what their comparative experiences are. So I wonder, I'd like to open it up to the room. I don't know if you want to close the slideshow down for a second, Kathy, if that's okay. Does anybody have any thoughts or reflections or any questions that they would like to share with the group, considering everything you've heard? I appreciate there was a lot of information there. Anything in particular stand out for anyone in relation to well, your own thoughts about the past year and a half, or your own experiences in the organisation you work with, parents you might work with? Anything in particular? Okay. Oh,
I'm happy to share. You know, I was thinking, I guess I work in the infant mental health, the new infant mental health service in Glasgow and Clyde, and but previously I've worked in parent-infant teams and perinatal services as a parent-infant psychotherapist. And what I'd been hearing about, I guess, was thinking about the quality of the relationship, and particularly where they might have had a baby in the last sort of 2 years over the period of the lockdown, and that there's been lots of, I guess, mixed feedback about that. And clearly there's been real pressure on paternal mental health. And then I was also thinking about other feedback about dads having opportunity to spend time with their babies, and mums telling me that they feel that they've had a different quality of relationship as well. So I was just wondering about that. I guess the data was about a whole range of children, wasn't it? But I'd be interested to hear about those dads who've had babies over the last couple of years as well.
Oh, sorry, Jane. I was going to say, yeah, I suppose going back to the data, I mean, I was really surprised by this, and maybe I shouldn't be. I'm not a researcher by trade, so other researchers, I'm sure, will be able to shed more light on it, and possibly Jessica's a good place to start. But I was really surprised by the number of hours that dads with newborns were spending with their children. So there was 50% that were spending 10 hours or more playing with their children, and then that drops down to about 25% for 1 year to 3 years, and then drops down again in the next from 3 to 5. So there's a huge kind of drop off at the end of that first year. So I suspect there probably is something about dads being more present during that first year. But obviously there's been a huge amount of stress on new parents over that time, and possibly Chris might be able to talk about that a little bit more. certainly we've seen in the data, I haven't pulled it out for this slideshow, but we'll hopefully do a bit more work on it in the future. But certainly there was dads talking about looking after their partners who are suffering from postnatal depression and that having an effect on them. And I suspect if we looked at the data, there would be a correlation. I suspect there would be more dads suffering from mental ill health during that period than dads in general, but I actually haven't looked at that data yet.
So yeah, thanks, Jane. So you're one of the many new infant mental health teams that are popping up across every health board in Scotland, aren't you? As alongside the other perinatal teams that are appearing. Douglas from Home Start Scotland, I should say, has helpfully shared a link to some of the research that they've done, which will provide a bit more detail, a bit more of an insight into this particular part of parenthood and family life. But Jane, I suppose, asking you as someone who's, as I say, one of many teams across every health board in Scotland, who's kind of beginning this process of leading a new team working around the context of infant mental health. Reflecting on the things that you've shared with us, the sort of thoughts you've had, what implications do you think that has for your team and for the colleagues that you work with in relation to thinking about how you work with parents, how you work with families, how you work with dads going ahead?
And yeah, well, we are just very much at the beginning. And I know, Chris, you came in as part of our induction, which was really helpful. I mean, from my point of view and from the team's point of view, we want to make sure, obviously, that we're inclusive in terms of how we work with dads in whatever we're doing, actually. And I guess that's, you know, one of our primary aims. Yeah, that's.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot there, Jane. But I suppose what you're saying is that it's this is an open window, isn't it? This is a golden opportunity to kind of engage right now, especially as teams like yours are in the process of beginning and formulating what it is that you're going to do to really engage in this conversation with every type of parent and every type of family. We've got a couple of other people have their hand up. I think John from Share Parent Scotland, I think you put your hand up first.
Thanks very much. I thought that was a terrific presentation, Kathy. Defer to your amazing skill in compiling graphics. I'm just going to throw in 2 or 3 very brief things. Firstly, you identified specific things to do with what are called non-resident parents. That is, parents who no longer live together. And what you've reported from the perspective of fathers is very consistent with what we've been perceiving certainly over the last couple of years. I would throw in, I'm not going to distract from the fact that this is about fathers, but the issues that are besetting that you described, separated fathers who are living apart from the mother, is also consistent with the stories that we're receiving from non-resident mothers who are the if you like, the contact parent and grandparents. They're both reporting similar circumstances and similar distress. But it is really important that you've captured that data. It is consistent with part of the story that we discovered when we did our own survey earlier this year. A small proportion of separated parents were actually finding that the lockdown and so on was actually in some ways liberating them from their long-standing conflicts, and they were actually finding a way of parenting on a much more cooperative basis. They had to share parenting when there was homeschooling, schools were closed and so on. Definitely a small proportion, but an encouraging proportion, and we encouraged it as much as we could. what our survey, however, discovered that was a more substantial, a majority of parents who were not the resident parent were saying that their contact was reduced or in total or reduced to nothing. Sometimes we were aware that this was a kind of exploitation of the COVID restrictions, and sometimes it was a genuine misunderstanding of the COVID restrictions, and it was very hard, given that the stories coming out of the UK government and the Scottish government were really often quite confusing. It was really difficult for parents to work out what they were required to do as opposed to what they were not allowed to do, and I think that added an entirely new layer of distress and confusion and bewilderment to both parents who were, and I suspect it was not unrecognized for parents that were living together in intact households. And the last thing that I was going to chuck in education, we discovered and we felt that especially during the period of school closures, but even afterwards, when there's a much more hybrid approach to engaging with parents in support of their children's learning, that a lot of the schools found it, or just said they found it very difficult to engage separated parents, separated fathers or mothers, just because for a lot of the schools, they were vague, rather vague about the platforms that they were using themselves. Sometimes the technology was beyond them. And so before the lockdown, before COVID, there was a reasonable expectation that both parents, as is statutorily required, would be able to generate their parental involvement in support of the children's learning. But when it went offline, a lot of the non-resident parents just got cut out of it. And the last thing, I heard a thing on the radio yesterday about an app that was being developed at, I think, Strathclyde University in response to the distress that pets were feeling about the sudden abrupt reduction of contact with their human colleagues when people started going back to work. And I thought, when I was listening to it, I thought, bloody hell, that is not going to be exclusive to smart black Labradors. This is actually going to, that there is an effect that when you've been working at home, you've had all that contact with your children, suddenly going back to work is a new change, and it is going to affect parents and it's going to affect children. And I haven't seen quite the enthusiasm for researching that as apparently is de rigueur for dogs.
Thanks very much for all that, John. So I think that yeah, it seems that as we kind of go along throughout this ongoing crisis, really this pandemic, that everybody's struggling to a greater or lesser extent, but clearly, in general terms, there are groups who are struggling a bit more profoundly for more specific reasons than others. Those who are separated from each other and trying to share the care of their children. And also, as Jessica mentioned, probably no surprise whatsoever to any of us that what was it, around about 90% of fathers from the higher SIMD areas saying that they were really struggling with their mental health, quite substantially more than other fathers, really. So no surprises there, really, but I suppose it's about, as you say, John, if we can put all this effort into developing an app to support pets and their mental health, then we really need to kind of try and make sure that a lot similar energy is put into supporting those parents that really need our help. I just noticed a comment there from Karen Drummond from the West of Scotland Mother and Baby Unit. Thanks for that, Karen. And I won't read out your comments quite, as everyone can read it for themselves. But yeah, just like I think a little insight into the real challenges that Karen and her colleagues are observing in the Mother and Baby Unit. For those that don't know what a Mother and Baby Unit is, it's a place where mums who have struggled at the acute end with acute mental health problems, either before or after the birth of a child. I mean, Karen, I don't know if there's anything that you would like to say about that, or anything you'd like to share, or.
I think so. I worked in the ward before COVID, and dads or partners were able to come up. We weren't strict with this. Sometimes you could be up a lot of time during the day and support mum with doing feeding or changing or bathing or playtime with babies. So it maintained and continued that bond that dad had with the baby. But now since COVID, I mean, it is better now, but with COVID, they're allowed up 1 hour a day in one family room. It has to be booked in advance. It doesn't always fit in with dad's work pattern, but in terms of actual practical space, we don't have anywhere else for them to go. So dads suddenly are separated from baby and their partner, and we've really noticed the impact that's having on them. They feel a lot of guilt, they feel they're not doing enough, they feel quite helpless and quite hopeless. And there's quite a lot of dads now who are really, have been much more open about they're really struggling with their mental health, but they're not getting the support that mum's been offered in the ward. And so, some of them have commented that they're feeling like they're losing that bond with baby, because mums can be in for 4, 5, 6, 7 weeks. It can be a long period of time, and they're seeing baby for an hour every other day. So we're trying to look at ways how to offer dads more support, and kind of part of my role is offering dads kind of more structured input in terms of their mental health, not just updating them on mum and baby before their mental health, but yeah, it's just becoming more and more obvious how, I guess, awful the situation is for them just now. And we're kind of, hands are kind of tied just with the restrictions, I guess. But yeah, we're trying to, if anyone's got other ideas of what else we could do, but it's just with the restrictions where we're really kind of stuck just now. But it's really sad to see.
Yeah. Sorry.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask Karen, because I know there's the 2 mother and baby units, and if you live in another part of Scotland, you might have to travel a long way. And so I was thinking about that additional isolation for fathers as well, that they could be away from any support network, completely isolated for weeks.
Yeah, and most of the time we do all the time usually have people out of area, so it's a long way for partners or dads to travel for an hour to go all the way back to wherever they're from, and when they're still working or managing or kind of caring for older children and things like that. So it really is a lot, and it's really taking their toll just now. So it's tough for them.
Well, thanks very much for sharing that, Karen. And I think that probably those of us, or those of you rather, that are working in those sort of frontline, not just maternity and perinatal settings, but any settings where we're working with children and infants and families, really feeling it now, you know, and really seeing the kind of the increased difficulties that people are having with these ongoing restrictions. I suppose we've only got a few minutes left, and it's really important for us not to try to think about where we go next. After all, this is what we're all here for, and this is what we're all about. It's about trying as best we can to formulate the beginnings, at least, of some solutions going forward. And so Karen has kind of put a call out there. If anybody has any ideas or any suggestions, then if we can help you connect with Karen and the team along in the West of Scotland Mother and Baby Unit. We've done a bit of work through there ourselves in the past, Karen, so we'll probably drop you a line and maybe have a catch up as well, see how things are. So as I say, we'll have a few minutes left. Before I pass you back to Kathy, who's going to talk about what next for Fathers Network Scotland and how you can be involved with us and maybe trying to kind of look at some of these issues that we've spoken about. Does anybody have any kind of final thoughts or observations or questions that you would like to share before I pass you back to Kathy?
Hi, sorry, Chris, thanks. I
Julie.
need to go in a couple of minutes before the end of the session. I am a Bluebell perinatal counselling service, and after a long period of our waiting list being lengthy and closed, we are now open, our donation-based services open to dads as well as mums, and I'm not sure that that message is always clear. So I just kind of wanted to put it out there, and we will be opening and closing our waiting list as we move forward, because we don't want to get the waiting list to the state it was in before. So I'm just to keep an eye on the Crossreach website and look out for Bluebell, but we are open to referrals from all over, and for dads as well as mums, absolutely.
Great. Well, thanks for that, Julie. That's great to hear that you're back in business again, so to speak. So we'll make sure that we share that good news on our social media and so on, as I'm sure others will too.
Yeah, and it's interesting because all your data, we're not seeing an increased amount of dads coming through our doors yet.
Okay.
So,
No problem.
okay. Thank you very much. Really, really interesting report. Fabulous. I'm going to go. Thank you.
No problem at all.
Thanks, Julie.
Okay, so yeah, just a few minutes left. Someone's popped a question up in the chat there. The answer to that is yes. So in simple terms, but what I'll do now is, if you don't mind, I'm just going to hand you back to Kathy to kind of talk to you about what's next then.
So yeah, we're just approaching the end. So we timed our survey and this discussion in line with International Men's Day, which is happening tomorrow. So all the information that you've been listening to today is all being published in a report tomorrow. So I've had to skip over a lot of the detail. So a lot of the things that Jessica was talking about, a lot of the sort of granular detail is in our report. So what I'll do is probably just email out to everybody who's attended today. So you've all got a copy of that and you can see it and have a good read through it. Over the next 3 months, we're going to look, I say we, Jessica, hopefully is going to have a look in more detail at for the groups of dads, I think, that we've looked at the moment. This is still open to a little bit of rejigging, but at the moment we're looking at dads during the perinatal period. We're going to take a deep dive into that group because, as I said, I think that they might be suffering from poor mental health more than other groups. Dads with children in the early years, so this drop off from a lot of engagement during the first year of the child's life to then the early years seems to require a little bit more investigation. So we'll look into that a little bit more and try and understand what the causes are around that. As Jessica said, we're looking at dads from deprived areas, particularly because we have a data set and we have dads who are keen to talk to us. So we'll get in touch with dads to try and find out about their experiences and unpick quite a lot. There's quite a lot of information within the report that wasn't pulled out today, but some really counterintuitive information about dads from deprived areas. They spend an awful lot of time playing with their kids. So just try to unpick all that. And hopefully we can, John Forsyth, we can work a little bit with you about the dads who are having difficulties with shared parenting. That was something that was coming through loud and clear from our survey, as in previous surveys. But obviously shared parenting, Scotland are the experts in this field. But if we can work with them to try and unpick some of the information that was in that report, that'd be fantastic. In addition to that, Chris is doing some work with dad's lived experience during the perinatal period, so dad's lived experience of mental health during the perinatal period, and that's with Maternal Mental Health Scotland. And then early next year, we're going to be starting to work on a Mental Health Act, which is being funded by November, which we're all really excited about. And we'll be having another dad survey in the not so distant future. So our idea is really to just keep understanding what the trends, what's happening with dad and how that fits into a longer trend. As I said, the data we're collecting from quite a small cohort, and that cohort is self-selecting, but it does give an indication of what's happening in the wider world. And our idea really is to try and do these surveys quite quickly and to get the information out to you guys really fast. So this survey data came into us, it just ended in November, and we're trying to get that information out to you so you can change policies and you can change your practices in real time to respond to what we're finding on the ground. So on that note, I'm going to pass it back to you somewhat. So it's International Men's Day tomorrow. I hope that what we've talked about today, what you've learned, has helped you think about possibly change some practices, some things that you might want to do differently, contact us, contact other people, you know, start to network, whatever that is. That's what you might do to support dads and to increase engagement between them and their children. And what's really important to us is that you tell us about it. So if you could spend just a couple of minutes filling in our evaluation, that would be fantastic. Chris is just going to put a link to our evaluation in the chat box. So just so we can capture what you thought about today's event, anything that that you can reflect on, that you might want to change, things that you might want to do differently, any thoughts for us, anything we should be doing differently, we can capture it in our evaluation. So if you could do that, that'd be fantastic. And Chris, no doubt, I think if you just put that in the chat box, Chris, fantastic. So Chris has done that. So I think that's about it. Do you want to say anything more, Chris, before we're on time? I can't quite believe it. I thought that was going to overrun massively. But somehow we've made it on time, Chris.
Well, let's just stick to being on time, and I have nothing more to say other than thanks very much for everyone, to everyone for coming along and participating, and keep in touch. Thank you.